Hey everybody, always great to reconnect with you as we head into the end of the year and in the last quarter of Parliament. I was having an interesting conversation with my daughter the other day. Just for her own context, she's 15 and she, for most of her life, has lived in a free South Africa. As many of you know, we're a mixed race family, and so for her, she's had to straddle both worlds. The world where she visits her gogo, who lives in Dobsonville in Soweto, and she has to visit her granny, who lives somewhere else. For my kids, they've grown up being fully aware of the disparities of our nation. And so, along with the many things that we're debating and we're speaking about in our country, we've both been watching the Madlanga Commission, but we've also been watching the ad hoc committee in Parliament. Along with all of that, there's been a contestation about BBBEE, with the ANC having to defend its position and the DA having to do likewise and introduce new pieces of legislation. And it struck a question to me as I was having a conversation with my daughter as to what future should she grow up in. Let me be clear. For my kids and for all the children of South Africa, I want them to grow up in a non-racial South Africa. I want them to grow up in a country that doesn't judge them for the color of their skins, but truly by the content of their character. I want them to live in a country where opportunities are offered to them so that they can grow and prosper. But I equally so want my children to grow up in a country that acknowledges the constitution of our country. And the constitution of our country in its preamble, because in many ways, what sparked the conversation between us, I was wearing a We the People shirt, and she said to me, where does that come from, or where does it put from? I put a quiz to her, and I reminded her of our constitution that says, we the people recognize the injustices of the past. Now, along with that is an invitation that we need to do redress. We need to figure out how do we address historical injustices. Now, fair enough, if you accept the principle of redress, the ANC has chose to narrow it on BBBEE and make it about race. The DA, in some ways, reads that part and says, yes, we're committed, but the best way to fix it is to figure out what the future does. I want to argue this case, that redress is an imperative in our country. But secondly, redress needs to fundamentally target education. Now, why do I say that? I say that to mean that, yes, there were many evils, injustices of the past. There was injustice of land. There was an injustice of economic exclusion. There was an injustice, but one of the greatest injustices that we faced up to is the injustice of Bantu education. What Bantu education did is said it distinguished what kind of education someone could get. It told many black South Africans that all you would end up with is just a worker on a farm, and therefore it was important for you to learn Afrikaans. But it didn't solve for us the system. It introduced high levels of duality in our education system. It meant that even if, as we are grappling with today, we begin to deal with the education, with the land question, there are many who get the land and sometimes don't know how to utilize it to its fullest extent because the expertise simply aren't always there. Even in economic opportunities aren't fully utilized. But who has benefited from any law that deals with redress? It's been young South Africans who were able to, in some ways, manage to get through the education process and prosper. Now, last week I was in a community in Zwede, and whilst I was in the Eastern Cape, I went to the school. When I got to the school, I realized more than anything, here is an injustice being recommitted. The school didn't have any working toilets. And in the main, it told me that for those young people, the reality is many of them were poor, all of them were black, it was clear that there was no ways they would prosper in our country. There was simply, they were never going to get there. And therefore, we are perpetuating a new injustice. The injustice that says, if you've got money in the Eastern Cape, you'll get an education. Maybe you'll end up at one of these Quintile 5 schools, ex-Model C schools, or you'll go to a private school. You'll prosper. But if you're poor, either you'll have no transport that will get you to school, you will arrive at a school with poor infrastructure, and heaven alone protect you that even in your walk to school, if it rains, if anything happens, you've got no chance. So if we are going to introduce redress legislation, I would argue we need to focus on education. We need to make sure that more and more of our young people are able to get bursaries that will allow them to get the best quality education. I would argue more than anything that for companies to be able to thrive and succeed, part of being able to trade in this country in recognizing these historical injustices, I wonder whether would not be to build the school in the Eastern Cape. As things stand at the moment, the education budget has been stretched. It has been distributed through provinces, and what was said about the Eastern Cape is that the provincial department had made no contribution to infrastructure development. They were simply dependent on whatever the state does. Now, this is one of 2 provinces that do likewise. Other provinces, no, they get an EIG grant, which comes from the national government, and they supplement it with their own income. The Eastern Cape simply does not do that, which means infrastructure backlogs in the Eastern Cape will remain ever such. And who is most impacted? It is these young people. It is these South Africans who are left out of the economic participation. So if we're really going to maximize any form of redress, I would argue it's education. I celebrate South Africans who, through decent schooling, were able to now compete. Many of us celebrate the one, many of the Eastern Capers, but one that we know all very well is a young person from Zwide who rose through the ranks and now is the captain of the Springboks. We look at that and we celebrate it. But I often never want to lose track of the fact that for Sia, education meant a significant difference. It put him in a school where he was able to then thrive and fulfill his talent. We celebrate so many who have gone all over the world, Uma, and so many others. But we forget that the critical intervention has been education. I would argue for people like Nelson Mandela, had it not been for the missionary schools, I dare wonder whether we would have people like Nelson Mandela. So if we're going to do this, here's what I would propose that we do. We've just seen a massive buyout of Curo that put 7 billion rands or a few billion rand into their coffers. It means, I hope, it'll democratize education, but let's argue that maybe the cost of an education for a child in a year is maybe 30,000 rand. The state spends over 13,000 rand per child per year. Now, if we put that on the table, put land and infrastructure what the state already owns, like the school I saw in the Eastern Cape, that already would reduce the cost of 30,000 because the school doesn't have to service the land or purchase the land and do others. If we could give parents a voucher by creating a jobs and justice fund that people could contribute into so that parents could have a voucher, we could eventually have covered, if you like, the first 2/3 of the cost of that of that education. And then the last bit, if I said to parents, your only job is to raise another 5,000 rand or another 10,000 rand by paying 800 rands a month for a quality education similar to that of Curo or any other private school or these Quintile 5 schools, I wonder whether we wouldn't change the prospects of that child in the Eastern Cape. So yes, for our economy to grow, we need skills. And the skills that we need to be developed and funded for. As things stand at the moment, the ratio of teacher to pupil in that particular school had moved from 1 to 50. So 1 is to 50. For every teacher, there are more than 50 learners that they have to cater to. The national average is 1 is to 32 and rising. So If we're going to correct for education, we need to think hard about the skills of the future, because the historical injustice was inflicted on education. And if our constitution compels us to do so, we need to be able to direct legislation to achieve the addressing of this historical injustice. The Constitution furthermore says, the preamble, we honor those who suffered for this justice and freedom in our land. We respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. Which brings me in many ways to my last point. Many people make the argument whether should race be used, should it not be used. Let me first of all say, for our future as a country, we need to address this injustice so that indeed we can be equal, united in our diversity, given the opportunities to compete, ensuring that money does not determine your future. And if money is still linked to your own background, where you come from, then we have a duty to make sure that money is not the new division. It's not included or excluded, but that we truly build a South Africa who belongs to all. When we started Build One South Africa, I wanted to be clear. I wanted all South Africans, black, white, Indian or colored, to work together towards prosperity. And to achieve that, we have to educate everybody. It must pain all of us that, for example, my daughter goes to a school, a public school, where their class is diverse. Their class has got South Africans from different backgrounds. But the one thing about their class is that it's a quintile 5 school, so income helps, and so they get the best education possible, and the governing body subsidizes their teachers. But I would hate to live in a country where that kind of education is only here preserved, because in that case we're inflicting a new injustice and we fail. So to me, I say if BEE must fall, it must be replaced with a type of redress that addresses our education. That must be our focus. Because if we miseducate our children, I promise you, we will perpetuate a society upon which the few who are able to access the limited and continuously getting fewer and fewer opportunities will be a provider of a few, and the majority of the population will linger in poverty. And so whilst our economy lingers on, I'm arguing our fundamental focus as South Africa must be to fix our education. The sooner we do that, we can change the prospect of all our citizens, and therefore we can maximize that we the people, all the people, black, white, Indian and colored, can work together, prosper together. This is a dream, this is a fight, and I believe that all of us as South Africans in our identity can stand together and say, we are South Africans. We're not first and foremost white, we're not first and foremost black, Indian or colored. We are all South Africans. But the best way to achieve that vision is that all of us must have an education that allows us not only to compete domestically, but to compete with anyone else in the world. When I look at our sporting codes and I see young people who have progressed in those, I know one feature is true. They've all gotten a decent and a quality education. So all I say today, educate, educate, educate. Much love. Speak soon.